So it never made sense to me that like he withdraws from the Sinquefield Cup, and now we're trying to justify it based on Hans's events 2 years ago, after Magnus loses what is like presumably not a game where Hans cheated, right? So Hans cheats, and like apparently the story was that like Hans has cheated in the past, but then doesn't cheat at the Sinquefield Cup. No one is like coming out and accusing him of that or suggesting like how he could have done it. And then he like beats Magnus. So I'm glad Magnus actually said like, oh, his behavior during the game made me feel suspicious. So he actually thinks Hans cheated during that game, which is not like totally outside the realm of possibility. And so like that to me does more justify his actions. I think that's a question like we had, like what would we do if we were in the same situation? Let's imagine we're the world champion, we're a top player.
Exactly.
We have one of the best chess intuitions in the world. Because without that kind of info, to me, like all of Magnus's actions have been like really just like damaging, right? Without a clear reason why. And obviously there's a lot of people speculating, but what I didn't like was that like Magnus like withdraws, and then all of a sudden there's now this like witch hunt into Hans's history, like checking every single one of his tournaments, every single one of his games, looking for any games that like match up with the engine. And because of like this heavy bias going in, I think a lot of people like as soon as they see one game where some of his moves match up with the engine, they're like, oh, that's it. He like must have been cheating. But all this is like kind of flying from this like one implicit accusation that Magnus is making. And then to me it was always very strange that it's like, okay, he withdraws from the Sinquefield Cup in the middle of the tournament. He's already played Hans. But we also know that when you're playing against someone who you think is using assistance, it's impossible to play normally.
In fact, that could explain why Magnus seemed to play a worse game than normal.
No, 100%. I think, and everyone has that feeling online. It's like when you're playing against someone who you think is cheating, like maybe it's possible to play well, but it's impossible to play your normal chess. And usually that means you play worse, at least in my experience, right? So that's totally normal that like Magnus thinks he's playing against someone who's cheating and then plays worse than usual. And Hans, who I think has been working on his chess, regardless of whether he's cheated before, now is a strong player, right? And is capable, I think, of beating Magnus on equal terms, right? If Magnus has a bad game. So, of course, the statement wasn't enough because he doesn't actually provide any real evidence that Hans cheated, right? So that's obviously like still, like maybe one of the biggest questions of this whole thing is like how exactly did it happen? But one thing that did look bad for Hans, of course, is that lots of people were doing this like let's check engine correlation thing, looking at his games and then getting 100% on his games. But no one seems to understand how that thing actually works. So, for instance, one theory that someone like threw out there is that everyone is checking Hans's games with all kinds of different engines, and as long as his moves match up at some point to one of the engines that has checked his games, which at this point is like hundreds and hundreds of people, then that's why he's getting like 100% engine correlation score, because his moves are matching up with something.
I mean, the correlation should be matching with one specific engine. That's the only way that the stat would make any sense.
No, it checks it against multiple engines.
I just want to clarify, like ChessBase itself says that it's not meant to be used as any kind of cheating detection, which they might just be saying just to be safe because they don't want people using it and making these like allegations all over the place. But I think it is an important point that like statistics can be manipulated, and especially stuff like this, it's like very easy, I think, to find guilt just by looking at random numbers where in fact there's nothing there.
Oh, there's definitely like enough numbers there that it's very suspicious. And what I'm trying to say is it shouldn't be used to be like, oh, this is some definitive thing. What it should be used for is for the chess community to call on people like Smerdon, people like chess.com, and be like, okay, show us what a professional analysis would look like, because this looks really bad. And we want some answers about what a professional analysis actually would look like and what the algorithm is.